we are tracking for you right now. The first report into the violence that rocked UK in Birmingham and Leicester is out. It has been over 45 days, viewers, since rampant violence had lashed Leicester and Birmingham in the UK. And we had shown you how Hindus living in the country were targeted, threatened, attacked, abused, and then blamed for it as well. They were called piss drinkers, cow shit, dogs, neo-Nazis, fascists, and much worse. All this even as they haplessly witnessed their religious symbols being desecrated. Today, the first report, the first document that explored into the cause of the recent Hindu-Muslim clashes is out, and it has found what we have been saying all along. There is no evidence of any Hindutva or RSS extremism behind those clashes. Instead, the report that has been put out by the Henry Jackson Society in the UK, which is a think tank, has concluded that a group of social media influencers, some with links to terrorism, had peddled this fake narrative to stir up tensions and instigate the violence. There are several highlights of this report that will force those people who were saying that it was perpetrated by extremist elements on the side of Hindus, it will force them to do a rethink. This report says that a fake narrative of RSS terrorists, quote unquote, was behind the unrest. It was peddled by social media influencers. They wanted to rally Muslims from across the UK to attend the protest. One influencer with over 800,000 followers posted a video of himself leading a group through Leicester, captioned "Muslim Patrol in Leicester." Another one also put out fake news articles suggesting that Hindus had kidnapped a Muslim girl. All this was fact-checked by the police, and this report that has been filed by Charlotte Littlewood, she says, and she finds that the unrest was falsely presented as an issue of organized Hindutva extremism and terrorism, which eventually led to Hindu cars and properties and even people being attacked and assaulted on the streets. Now, after this report has come to fore, there are reactions coming in from across political lines. Will those who have earlier been pinning the blame on the victims, calling them perpetrators in this case, now apologize?
कुछ इस्लामिक ताकतें इस्लामिक जिहाद के समानांतर एक हिंदू आतंकवाद के नैरेटिव को खड़ा करना चाह रहे हैं, लेकिन इस नैरेटिव को खड़ा करने के पीछे उनको जो मदद और जो प्रेरणा मिली है वो भारत से मिली है। जब कांग्रेस पार्टी ने अपने शासनकाल में सैफ्रन टेररिज्म और हिंदू टेररिज्म शब्दों का इजहार किया था।
We know from the history of Hindu society, anywhere where they live, they are present in more than 100 countries, that they contribute that particular country, they contribute wealth and prosperity and happiness to that society, serve the society, become one with the society, unlike the perpetrators of Leicester violence who live off doles, who treat the host country as dirt, who try to misuse every law available to them to impose their own worldview. This particular episode, I think, should be last in UK's history, and we should have better race relations. That's possible only when you appreciate the good people and openly criticize the wrong people.
The social media influencer of the particular community were trying to project Hindus as if they are trying to create unrest in UK. Fact is that Hindu can never be violent. As per Hinduism, no violence has not been preached, whereas in other religion, violence has been preached. So that's the difference. But yes, there are people who use that as a tool, as social media as a tool, and in India, people then support all such elements. And then they speak against Hinduism and they target Hinduism or Hindus in world wherever they are.
देखिए, ये जो इस्लाम हिंदू फोबिया का जो नैरेटिव बिल्टअप करने की कोशिश की जा रही है, जो लोग हिंदू फोबिया के शिकार हैं, उन्होंने ये सब कहानी गढ़ी थी। देखिए, ये जो हिंदू टेररिज्म या भगवा टेररिज्म की जो कहानी थी, वो कांग्रेस ने गढ़ी थी, भारत के अंदर ही गढ़ी गई थी। अन्यथा तो आप देखिए, विश्व के अंदर जहाँ जहाँ भी बम विस्फोट हुए हैं, जहाँ जहाँ भी आतंकवादी घटनाएं घटी हैं, वहाँ का कोई आरएसएस है, वहाँ कोई वीएचपी है क्या, कोई हिंदूवादी संगठन है क्या? संपूर्ण विश्व के अंदर जलाने वाले लोग तो वही हैं जो अल्लाह अकबर का नारा लेकर के और कत्लेआम करने पर उतारू हो जाते हैं।
Some are claiming this as vindication, others are still skeptical. To join us with the details of this report is the author, Charlotte Littlewood herself. She's a research fellow at HJS and a former counter-extremism coordinator. She joins us live. Thank you for joining us. Charlotte, first of all, tell us about this report. On what basis did you compile this? Did you speak to people? Did you get eyewitness accounts, etc.?
Thank you very much for having me on today. And yes, that's absolutely what we did. Not only did we go to Leicester and speak to the communities most affected, so I spoke to members of the Hindu community and members of the Muslim community living in the part of Leicester that was heavily affected by the vandalism and the marches. I also corresponded with the police over email and looked at police statements, looked at police incident reports. I also contacted the temples that were affected and conducted numerous interviews. Also, you'll see, if you've had a read of the report, that there's an awful lot of primary source social media. So we looked at how people were organising the marches, how they were encouraging people to attend, what kind of language they were using, and then we looked into their identities and into their accounts to see who they were connected to. And that's how we really came to the conclusion that those that had conducted the Hindu march, seemingly at this stage still no evidence to connect them at all to politics in the subcontinent. However, those that were involved in organising the anti-Hindutva march did indeed have connections to politics and very concerning individuals, support for very concerning individuals in the subcontinent. And that's how we came to that conclusion.
Okay, but there are also those people who would say that you've only looked at one aspect of the story, because even somebody as senior as the mayor of Leicester, Peter Soulsby, had come out to say that, you know, there might be Hindutva elements that were involved in the clashes. Did you speak to both the sides while compiling this report?
Yes, absolutely. You'll see inside the report that we have interviews with the Muslim community as well. And my job was to really look at the claims that were being made. So there were direct claims. A youth group, a group of young men were directly accused of being RSS terrorists. So that direct claim then was something that we investigated. The general claims of Hindutva was something that we could look at whether or not there's any prescribed Hindu organisations in the UK. We could look at whether there are organisations in the UK that there's been any criticisms of links to Hindutva or RSS. These were the kind of lines of interrogation we could go down, and that we found overwhelmingly that there was no evidence that this was impacting and driving the activity in Leicester on the ground.
Okay, but there is also a simultaneous police probe that is on. While yours is the first report to come out, we are yet to see something from the police. Will your report be considered by them as well? Have you submitted it to them?
The police have actually been coming out with statements, and they are regularly updating their website. So you can see the police coming out with statements. They came out with a lot of very useful statements around misinformation at the time, because the misinformation campaign against the Hindu community was a part of the drive against the Hindu community across the UK. So they came out and they made statements to say that there had been no kidnapping, that there had been no attack on a mosque. And now they're coming out with lists of those that are being charged and updates on the number of arrests. So the police are constantly updating, but it won't be the police won't create a large report of their own. There will be an independent inquiry into what happened in Leicester, which we had hoped was going to be coming out later this year. However, there's been large controversy about whether or not it has remained independent. Therefore, the lead of that independent review has resigned due to lack of independence. So we're at a loss for an independent review. So at this stage, the Henry Jackson report is the seminal report, and I expect will continue to be the seminal report for quite some time.
Okay, so tell us, what all did people that you speak to tell you in first person that led you to believe that it wasn't in any way an attack that was instigated by the Hindus? In fact, they were the victims of it.
Oh, well, it was a conflict between Hindu young men and Muslim young men in Leicester that had been taking place from much earlier in the year. And there was prejudice from both sides. There was anti-Muslim prejudice and anti-Hindu prejudice. But what there wasn't was any discussion around India and Pakistan and nationalism. And what there wasn't was any sense that this was coming from being funded by or pushed from the subcontinent. Instead, this was a micro community cohesion conflict between two groups of young Muslim and young Hindu men who were clashing with each other, with territorial elements and a gang element to it. Then got painted as an infiltration of RSS indoctrination from abroad, which, as you well know, was then jumped on by the press, who started looking at Hindutva, what is Hindutva,
Okay.
discussing about Indian politics at this time.
That's very interesting. You say that it was being given a particular color abroad. Who do you think could be those people behind this?
What we can see from the report is that this was being driven by a number of popular social media influencers who actually get themselves involved in agitations across the country along different topics. So those that you see in the report who were pushing this Hindutva narrative on Leicester also were involved in protests against LGBT education in schools, also were protesting against the Lady of Heaven film, which was to be shown in Cineworld in the UK and was brought down because there were large protests against it being blasphemous. So these agitators are famous in a sense for protesting against things they consider to be blasphemous, LGBT, and then they push this anti-Hindu agenda.
Do you think in some way this anti-Hindu agenda, Bogi, was also perpetrated by the media there? We saw some protests that took place in Leicester against The Guardian, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, we did see the mainstream media take this as an opportunity to discuss politics in the subcontinent rather than to look at what was really happening on the ground in Leicester. And that was really difficult, dangerous, in fact, for the Hindu community. The reasons behind which they did this are unclear. It could potentially be because it's easier to talk about issues abroad than to talk about issues of your own in your own country. But it seemed that mainstream media really did take the opportunity to discuss Hindutva and Indian politics instead of going and speaking to those affected and working out first whether Hindutva was really present.
Right. Thank you, Charlotte, for joining us and throwing light on something that has become quite murky. A lot of underlying malintent is what comes out from your report that has led to Hindus being victim right ahead of their festive season. Remember, in the UK. Thank you for joining us once again. We take a very quick break on that note.